Welcome to So True. And today's devotional is entitled Talking Things Up. And it comes from Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 10 through 14. In 1856, Andrew Bonner, brother of the hymn writer Horatio Bonner, and the close friend of Robert Murray McCheyne, became pastor of a new church in Finiston Street in a needy area in the city of Glasgow, Scotland. God multiplied his efforts and blessed his work. Before long, what had been a small and struggling work had now mushroomed into a congregation of more than 1,000 members with a burgeoning Sunday school program and local outreach into the city. When a friend asked one day how things were going, Bonner replied, "Oh, we're looking for great things." When his friend cautioned him not to expect too much, Bonner replied, "We can never hope for too much." Some years earlier, 1836 to be precise, McCheyne had arrived in Dundee, Scotland, to take charge of a church plant effort in the northwest corner of the city. It would not be an easy place for ministry, as a great deal of poverty and vice marked and marred daily life there. A city given to idolatry and hardness of heart was the way the youthful preacher McCheyne described Dundee. But then he added, "Perhaps the Lord will make this wilderness of chimney tops to be as green and beautiful as the garden of the Lord, a field which the Lord hath blessed." What I love about those two stories is the positive affirmation and anticipation voiced by these men concerning the Lord's work, all underwritten by a belief that if God is for them, who can be against them? Romans 8:31. They did not allow the challenge of the circumstances or the cautionary tale of others to dampen their confidence or hope in God. When it came to the Lord's work, they talked things up. They believed that they would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, to echo the words of Psalm 27:13-14. Look, listen, when it comes to the Lord's work, we need to talk as though we believe God is triumphantly at work. Isn't that the promise of 2 Corinthians 2, verse 14, where Paul tells us concerning the Lord Jesus as head of the church, he is always leading us in triumph. The way we talk about God's work is important. It must be a matter of faith, not frustration, not fear. To go to our text, Nehemiah chapter 4, one is struck by a variety of voices, each with their own opinion and take on the Lord's work. You can read that in verse 10, verse 11, and verse 14. As the work of rebuilding the city of Jerusalem ground on, everybody seemed to have an opinion as to the odds of success. Would the work ever get across the finishing line? First, there were those within Judah who said, "We can't." You can read about that in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 10. Given the tiredness of the workers, given the size of the work, things seemed increasingly impossible. A second voice, a second perspective, that comes from Israel's enemies who said, "You won't." You can read about that in Nehemiah 4, verse 11. They promised to come upon God's people doing God's work and demolish their every effort and bring to an end the work they were seeking to do. They opposed Nehemiah's plans for the welfare of the city from day one. In chapter 2, verse 19, they used ridicule. In chapter 4, they used threats of violence. In chapter 6, they employed duplicitous friendship. Third, there was Nehemiah, the leader of the work itself. He's the third voice. He's the third perspective. And what he says in Nehemiah 4, verse 14 is this: God will. Remember, the people of God say, "We can't." The enemies of God say, "You won't." But this leader says, "God will." In Nehemiah 4:14, he tells the people to remember God, who is great and awesome, and to fight for their families. If you scroll down to verse 20, you'll see that he promises that God will fight for them. Here was a man who believed that the Lord's work is just that. It's the Lord's work. He'll do it. He'll accomplish it. What God had promised, God would perform. Back in chapter 2, verse 20, Nehemiah says that God will prosper the work. And God did. Listen, when it comes to the Lord's work, let's ignore the voices of doubt and hate, and instead speak with a voice of faith and confidence. Let us remember that we can never hope for too much, that the wilderness can become the garden of the Lord. I hope this So True devotional has been a real encouragement to you. If you're in leadership in the local church, I hope it's an encouragement. And I know that many of you are involved beneath the leadership in different aspects of local church ministry. I pray it will be an encouragement to you also. Let's talk things up in a day when people are talking things down.